The baton is passed. Well, hello and welcome. How are you? Great, good. Well, you know, oftentimes when I ask people that question, I don't hear great and good. What I hear is busy. How are you? I'm busy. I'm hectic. Things at work are out of control. I feel like I'm spinning and spinning. I feel like I can't get caught up. And I've heard that response lots of times. In fact, I've said that many times. And then sometimes there's a pause, and people will say with a sigh, but you know, I think we'll get back to normal soon. Well, I'm here to tell you today that I think that normal that we're striving for, that's stable and even and level, is not going to happen. And we have a worldview about stability that I think we need to challenge. So let me share with you a little bit about what a worldview is and why we want to talk about that. This gentleman is Christopher Columbus. And do you remember back in your 5th grade history, what was the worldview that he challenged? That the world was flat, right? That was a really a terrible thing to say. People believed that the world was flat. Now, the reality is not everybody believed that. At Christopher Columbus's time, astronomers and scientists had done the calculus, done the math, and figured out that the world probably wasn't flat, but that it was a globe, that it was spherical. And Christopher Columbus, not in the spirit of scientific inquiry, but because he knew that it could be quite lucrative if he could use this knowledge and find a new way to get from Europe to Asia, because the trade route there had been disrupted with the fall of Constantinople. And so he said, I'm a sailor, and if really the world is a sphere, and if I'm here in Europe and I sail to the west, as crazy as that sounds, I should end up in the east. And so he's looking a little glum here because it took him quite a long time to convince anybody to fund this crazy idea that you could get east by sailing west. But he finally got the money and the ships and he set sail. Now you and I know something that was going to trip him up, right? We knew that between Europe and Asia, if you went the western route, there's some big obstacle, these 2 huge continents that we're standing on right now, right? And so instead of getting to Asia, Columbus landed in the Caribbean. But nonetheless, he hadn't fallen off the face of the earth. In fact, he made that journey back and forth 4 different times. And never once did he fall off. Not once. And so people started to change their mind. In fact, I would believe there's not a single solitary person in this room that believes that the world's flat. Am I right? Absolutely. So he challenged that worldview successfully. However, here's the funny thing about worldviews, is we hold on to them sometimes tenaciously, even in spite of evidence to the contrary, even in spite of the fact that holding on to them gets in our way. And Columbus was no different. He really held on to this belief that he had landed in Asia. In fact, he felt he had landed in Indonesia specifically. And so he called the people that he encountered there Indians, a name that sticks till today. And because he fiercely believed that he had landed in Asia, he failed to either claim or name this land that he was on. And that is why today we live in America and we don't live in Columbia or Columbus. He failed to do that. So what's the worldview that I think we need to change? And it's this one, is we think of change as an event, a disruptive event that happens and that we're going to get through it, we're going to muscle through it, and then it's all going to be back to normal and things will be business as usual. And I believe that this notion that we could be stable and in control of things and plan and manage our way forward came out of the industrial age. Because that was a time where really innovation was happening continually, but the space in between major disruptions was so long that we could get acclimated to it. We could breathe. We could figure out how to organize our world around this new way. Let's take the telephone as a for example. It was the mid-1800s when a couple folks were tinkering around with this idea of how could we transmit the human voice through wire to somebody far away. And it took 26 years until Alexander Graham Bell actually patented it. That's a pretty long time. And then he very quickly commercialized it. He created the first switching company, which we now know as AT&T. And it was called the switching company because it was switchboard technology. If you wanted to talk to somebody, transmit your voice over distance, you called an operator who finagled lots of wires and connected you physically, right? Well, switching technology lasted for 50 years, which is a long time. You can build a career around that. You can build a company. You can figure out how to manage that. Until wonder of wonders came the rotary phone, and switchboard operators were no longer needed. And the rotary phone was the way to do telephone for a long time until 33 years later came touchtone. Wasn't that a marvel? So it took a long time in between innovations. Now, you were all asked to put your cell phones away. How much have they changed in the last 2 years, in the last 5 years? So we're starting to see these breakthrough innovations come faster and faster and faster. Amazing breakthrough innovations. But because, again, in the past, in the industrial era, they were spaced out, we started to build organizations that look like this, right? Nice and tidy. Is that nice and neat? And everybody has a little box that they fit in with a role description that was created by HR. Took them probably about a couple years to do it and take them a couple years to figure out something different, right? And there's a hierarchy, and you start as a worker and you work your way up the ladder of success. And we started to model schools around this notion that you get educated when you're young and you go to college and you figure out what you want to do for the rest of your life. But we still do that, right? We counsel students to ask what they want to do for the rest of their life. And the thought is, then you find the right company, you join it, you work hard, you work the way up the ladder to success. And maybe 30 years from then, you retire with a nice fat pension. And we continue to build schools like that, even though that's not the way the world's working right now, right? It's crazy. In these nice, tidy organizations, we thought that the leader at the top should know it all and pass that wisdom and those decisions down, that communication should flow from the top down, and we all know that works, right? We had a notion of this controlling our environment, including nature. So we didn't give much regard to these scarce, precious natural resources that we have. But we've built schools and communities around this idea and organizations. But it's not the world we live in anymore. We are not in the industrial age. We are in the information age. And things are happening faster and faster. And here are 4 reasons why we can no longer hang on to this notion of stability. The first is called Moore's Law. And the Moore's Law states or tells us, and has proven through this line, that our ability to compute the way that we can power information doubles every 18 months. So we build more and more powerful computers. Doubles every 18 months. And when that happens, you get the straight line. As if that's not enough, there are 3 other things that are happening in concert. The second is that we're able to build fiber optic networks and other ways to transmit that information faster. And while our computing power doubles every 18 months, we double the speed at which information flows every 9 months. So you think about that Moore's Law curve, this is even steeper. So you can get more information out faster. The third factor is that the cost of storing this massive amount of information is plummeting, and it's reducing in half every year. So what that means is in 1980, if you wanted to purchase a gigabyte of data, and I was around in 1980 and we weren't talking gigabytes, but if you were wanting to purchase a gigabyte of data in 1980, it would cost you $6.3 million. Okay? So let's go forward 10 years to 1990. That same gigabyte of data would cost you $100,000. Fast forward another 10 years, now we're to the year 2000. That gigabyte of data cost you a cool grand, $1,000. 2010, not all that long ago, could buy a gig of data for $12.48. And here we are in 2014. Just a few days ago, got on Amazon, figured out what it would cost me to buy a gig of data. $2.14 retail. So, you've got these three factors, and then the wild card, the thing that puts everything on tilt, is we have connected people all over the globe, all over this world, through the web. And so we can communicate, we can collaborate, we can innovate, we can change, we can add to the knowledge base, we can access information that we never had in ways that are just unbelievable. And even if you're in the remotest corner of the earth, you have this amazing possibility. And so these factors are accelerating things to the point that I don't think we can ever be stable again, or even have that illusion of stability. It's futile. We need to shift our worldview to one that's more in tune with what's happening here. So what does that mean? What might our organizations look like? I'll share with you a metaphor, and this is how I see it. I think in the industrial era, we built organizations and schools and communities like big ships that sailed the ocean. Hunks of metal with lots of mechanistic and lots of equipment to force it through the water. They were manned by crews with every person doing their thing, from the captain on down to the poor slob in the boiler room. There were only a couple people on the ship that were looking out to see where you were navigating to, up on the deck, and everybody else was kind of heads down doing what they needed to do to steer this big ship. These are massive vessels that take a lot of energy to get going, do not decelerate very fast, nor heaven forbid they have to turn very quickly, right? And they consume huge amounts of natural resources that are not replenishable to plow through the water. I think a better metaphor for the way we should be looking at organizations and communities and schools in today's world is that of a fleet, an interconnected fleet of sailboats. And I love the metaphor of sailing for a couple reasons. One is that there are much smaller crews, and everybody's on deck, and everybody is paying attention to the wind and the weather and what's going on about them. Now, there is somebody in charge. There's a captain. But people on the deck are fluid, and they're going to where they need to be in the moment that they need to be there. I love the metaphor of the sailboat because it does not squander precious natural resources. It uses the wind. And as we in Indiana know, we got lots of wind. And I love them because of the fact that a sailor knows to get from point A to point B, one must tack, or not go in a straight line, but work with the wind and with that resistance back and forth, and that indeed is the fastest way. Now that sounds all kind of airy-fairy, and metaphors are all nice, but what does it mean in the real world? Well, I work with organizations and I study what's working now, and I'm going to share with you a few ideas of what these organizations that look like, that are not built for stability, but are built for agility. They look like this. They do not look like hierarchies. They are networks of interconnected people across the globe, sometimes, most often. Communication flows up, down, sideways, all over the place. These are organizations that are built to be outward focused rather than inward focused. So lots of people are charged to collaborate on the outside to bring information in. We're starting to build organizations that have a core of common processes like accounting and HR. And other than that, everything around them is pretty dynamic and fluid. And people come together for projects or things that need done. And what you're doing these 2 months might be different than what you're doing the next 2 years. And that's okay. We can rapidly assemble, reassemble, deploy people relatively quickly. These are organizations that are out there testing new ideas in the world. They've not delegated or relegated innovation to R&D or to a skunk works, which is typically describing how we felt about that change in those old organizations, so it's pretty smelly. And they're out there testing, figuring out what works, and when it works, they're embracing it and figuring out how to get it to market quickly. Not in 10 years, not in 5 years, but quickly. And people aren't resisting it and going, this will never work here, right? So, power is more often shared in these networks. So leadership can emerge in lots of different places and people can take the ball and run with it. And these are also organizations, there are many new organizations that are looking at, in addition to profit, asking the question, what do we need to do for the planet? And what do we need to do for the people that we touch? Many organizations that are built for agility today are looking at human resources and headcount, not as a liability, but an asset, and asking how they get the most creative people on board. How do they get people that are willing to go with them and figure out new things in new ways? Those are the organizations that we're starting to see emerge. These are organizations that understand that success isn't a straight line or a narrow path. They understand that the path to success is wiggly, wobbly, back and forth, step back, takes two steps, and that sometimes you're going to fail along the way. And if you fail, you know what? It's not a career stopper. We just understand that that's part of the way of innovation and doing things a different way. And in fact, some celebrate it and say, okay, what have you learned about it? These are organizations that have shifted their worldview. They're not built for stability. They are built to change. So I'm going to ask each and every one of you today to challenge some of your worldviews. And are you operating out of a worldview in which you control and you conquer, or one in which you collaborate and compete? Are you operating from a worldview in which we dominate the earth and squander natural resources, or one in which we treat those as the treasures they are and figure out ways to sustain and renew? Do you look at change as an event to be avoided at all cost? Or have you started to recognize that change is dynamic and that you need to work with it? Are you to the point of saying, instead of being stable, it's far better to be agile? Because if we're agile and if we can change with the change, we can adapt, and that gives us sustainability. Thank you very much.